Ugh. So I watched Rings of Power episode 5.
Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any minute. Going for a ride down the side.
Hi everyone, my name is Jake Berry. Welcome to the StudioJake vidcast where I talk about all things pop culture. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that little bell if you're watching on YouTube so you get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. Alright, so I watched Rings of Power episode 5, the Amazon alleged adaptation of the Silmarillion by famous, legendary, iconic author J.R.R. Tolkien. As this show has progressed, I've come up with two problems outside of their very poor adaptation of this fascinating novel by Tolkien, and it's that it's got way too many characters and that there is so much freaking talking. Those have been my two primary issues with the show. Now, with episode 5, we have a different problem. Nothing freaking happens in this episode. It was shorter than all the ones that have come before, and nothing happens to make the story progress. Nothing. So, I'm going to be reading my little summary of it like I do for the Rings of Power review series that I'm doing. Buckle up. This one, like I said, is going to be a little shorter than the others, just as far as the episode description is concerned, because it was short and nothing happens. All right, so we open to Durin the Third giving one of the dwarf rings, one of the 7 rings that belong to the dwarves. He is concerned because his realm, it's covered in darkness, because they're in a freaking mountain. But that's what's happening with Khazad-dûm. There's no light. So he goes to speak to some of the miners who are trying to create light shafts, and his son, Durin the Fourth, realizes that he has the ring on, and he wants them to dig in a particular place, but his son warns him, hey, that's where a foundational stone is, but he insists that they do it, and when no one wants to, the king grabs a pickaxe and begins digging himself, and pop, there's sunlight. He orders them to do this in other places where the ring reveals it to him, and light starts to return to Khazad-dûm. So he celebrates this and tells his son, next time listen to me when I talk to y'all. We cut to Celebrimbor, who is toasting the friendship with the dwarves, but Anata, or Anata, whatever his name is, the new disguise for Sauron, he's being angsty on it, and he's ready to start the 9 Rings of Men, but Celebrimbor is kind of like, no, we're not going to do that. So then it cuts to Numenor, and the Queen Regent's cousin has taken over Numenor. He is kind of angsty about it, though, and he wants to go to the Undying Lands. And it cuts to Elendil, who is trying to convince the Queen Regent to take back the throne, but she's like, no, because I looked into the Palantir and I don't think I can do it. Elendil said, oh, he also got a glimpse in the Palantir when he picked it up, and he saw a vision of like him riding on a horse, and she somehow interprets this as things have changed. By the way, that's not what the Palantir was used for. Yeah, it would give the people who touched it vague visions, but it was more about what was connected to the other Palantirs. It wasn't like a fortune-telling stone. It was so you could see what was going on in other places of Middle Earth. And if someone else touched it while you touch it, they could see what you saw. That's what it was. So anyway, you find out that Elendil's daughter has been promoted by the cousin king, and she demotes her own father, and anyone who refuses to swear an oath of loyalty to the cousin king, she is responsible for demoting them all or relieving them of duty entirely. So we then cut back to the High King, and he gets a propaganda letter from Celebrimbor who's telling him everything's hunky-dory. But one of his elf advisors is like, hey, we should, since everything's fine with Celebrimbor, we need to invade Mordor. And then for some reason we get a shot of Elrond and his merry men running. So we go back to Khazad-dûm, and Disa, who is one of the most inconsistent characters in this show. I don't know who is responsible for writing her character, but that person needs to be fired because she is not consistent at all. So she was complaining that her husband and the king, because her husband Durin the Fourth is Durin the Third's son, obviously. She was griping and whining about how they need to be reconnected. Well, so then he reconnects with the king and gets promoted, but then now she's upset about that. And it's golly. So make up your freaking mind, Disa. The only thing we know about her is that she is so inconsistent. Anytime a character does something that she asks them to do, she then whines about it. It is crazy. So they buy a toy for their daughter, like, or a crystal ball thing. It stumbles into a deep lake, and she goes to it and sings, and then like this force like roars back at her. You see King Durin the Third. He's giving the rings to other dwarf lords. During the fourth, comes in and says, Father, Disa sensed a great evil. We need to do something about it. And he's like, nah, it's fine. The rings are telling me this. I'm going to go with what the rings say. So then we go back to Celebrimbor, and one of his chick elves, she has like a vision of the forge on fire. And basically, she was saying we need to probably do the rings of power. And then we go back to Durin. And he's arrived at Celebrimbor's place, and he's whining about his father's behavior. And he questions whether the elf who's actually Sauron has somehow sabotaged the rings. And then so Sauron kind of observes this happening. And then he and the elf chick who had the vision have like a tender moment. So now we go back to Numenor. Alindi and a group of his loyal soldiers, they're having a funeral in the shrine. The Cousin King's little dweeb thug shows up and shuts it down and says, hey, we're going to close this and we're going to turn the shrine into an aqueduct. And he purposely shatters a priceless relic. Alindi punches him, and then a fight starts. And a random guard grabs Elendil. Now remember, he's supposed to be like this great warrior, but this guard just kind of like bear hugs him from behind, and he's like, no, no, everyone stop fighting. What are you doing? One of his soldiers ends up getting killed by the thug in a little bit of a tussle, and Elendil gets arrested because of this. Now we go back to the Celebrimbor's forge, and he's whining about what the dwarf said to him, what Durin said to him. He's whining about it to Sauron, and Sauron gaslights him into making him think that his designs were flawed, that it wasn't a problem of the rings being infiltrated, it was Celebrimbor himself who made the mistake. So now we go back to the dwarves, and they have a conversation about it, about the rings, and Durin the Third promotes his son, gives him like this chess piece thing, and now she's upset again. Disa, I mean, she's upset again, even though he did exactly what she wanted to, but she makes him promise never to put on one of the rings, and he swears it. So then we go back to Celebrimbor, who is now announcing that yes, we are going to create the 9 rings of man, and he kind of does it kind of mean, like he's very to his team. So then after he leaves, Sauron steps up and is like the hype man, and he encourages the team, and he's like, we're going to get this done, hurrah. And so then they all start working. We see Adar the Uric marching with his orc army onto where the forge is, and that they still have Gladriel captured. We see Elrond back with the High King, and he's like, of course, oh, Gladriel was right. And he has her ring, and the High King is like, yeah, I get it, but we can't fight Sauron and Adar. Unbeknownst to them, Sauron is actually at the forge. So then you see that Adar, he then decides to tempt Gladriel, and he's like, we have a common enemy. And that's how the episode ends. And yeah, that's about it. So what did I learn from this episode? Absolutely freaking nothing. They went through all of these 3 different story arcs between the dwarves, the forge, and the elves, and we still don't know anything. There was no new information presented other than, I guess, there's a great evil in Khazad-dûm. You could have skipped all over this, and you would have not. Oh, I forgot Numenor. So 4 story arcs, I guess. You don't know what's going on. It's really embarrassing, the writing, the creatively bankrupt approach to the Silmarillion. They should have just done a straight up adaptation where they made it an anthology series, instead of trying to cram in 2,000 years of Middle Earth history into 2 seasons, which I actually think the show's supposed to go on for 5. How's it going to go on for 5? We've already got the 3 elven rings, the 7 dwarven rings, and they're just starting the 9 rings of man. So I don't know how they're going to continue to move the show forward because there's really nothing left. They've skipped so much. They're just making up bad Tumblr fan fiction of the show. It's so poorly written. This episode in particular, in episode 4, were so terrible because before I'd always said, yeah, if this had just been its own standalone fantasy series, I can see how it would be passable. But because it's Tolkien, that's what makes it bad. 4 and 5 were not like that. They were incredibly boring, sour. Nothing important happens. They just keep introducing new characters. None of these people in this story are anything like they are in the Cimmerillion. It's a joke. It's laughable, and it's truly sad that this is what people are going to think is real Middle Earth. If you like that video, be sure to give it a like, share it out to all your friends, leave me a comment and tell me what you think, and subscribe. Don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, to ring that little bell so you get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. If you don't want to support me on big tech, I don't blame you. Click on the link to my locals community. It's in the description. It's kind of like a Patreon or Subscribe Star where you can send me tips on articles that I post there, which there are exclusive articles there as well. Or you can become a monthly subscriber. You can also purchase one of my books. I really appreciate it when you do stuff like that. It helps small indie creators like myself. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.